what are the data as you know them to be, or maybe your lab's even doing this kind of work and exploration about the role that sex, orgasm, masturbation play in getting to sleep and staying asleep and sleep quality? Certainly those behaviors and those physiological events have been part of our evolutionary history.
Right.
What's the story there? What can we say about this in terms of science and dare I say practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost that caricature of, in the movies where, a couple makes love and then all of a sudden you just sort of hear snoring or, it happens with the idea that it's somewhat somnogenic, that it's sleep promoting.
Well, the post-orgasmic increase in prolactin.
Well, that's
is
interesting.
Thought to be a naturally occurring sedative that presumably has a function in.
And oxytocin has that benefit where you see, a dissipation of the fight or flight branch of the nervous system, which has to happen for you to fall asleep. That's why we often see, here at the sleep center, we'll see a phenomenon called wired and tired, where people say, look, I am so desperately tired. I'm so tired, but I can't fall asleep because I'm too wired. So your sleep drive, you're desperately tired, it's there, but because you're wired, because you've got too much sympathetic activation, too much cortisol as well, you can't fall asleep. It's an impressive roadblock to anything like good sleep, and it's one of the principal mechanisms that we now believe, stress and physiological activation, that is the underlying cause of many forms of insomnia. But coming back to sex, the data is actually quite compelling that both either subjectively assessed sleep quality or objective amount of sleep, sex that has resulted in orgasm, and I think it's that latter part that typically needs to happen.
I would imagine so.
So between two mutually exclusive individuals where both are beneficial in terms of receiving an orgasm.
Yeah, I would say any discussion about sex, we were referring to consensual, age-appropriate, species-appropriate, context-appropriate.
Wow, I would never have even gone to the species-appropriate.
I put species in there because it's the internet and people will come up with all sorts of ideas. So I think that age-appropriate, consensual, context-appropriate, and species-appropriate covers all the bases. But if I missed any, put them in the comment section and we'll be sure to take note.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said and important to say. So the data is there when you look at couples who have orgasm. We've also, however, found benefits of masturbation, and it's not frequently spoken about, but if you do some surveys, it turns out that people will often use masturbation as a sleep tool if they're struggling with sleep. And I know this sort of sounds almost like a strange conversation or it's a taboo conversation, but I think we just need to be very open about it. I
started off in science. One of the things I worked on early in my career, not the very first topic, was the topic of early influences of hormones, estrogen and testosterone, on sexual development of the brain and body. And when you are weaned in a laboratory like that, regardless of what era, you look at sex and its behaviors and its hormones and its physiologies as a scientist. And so I think that's, to be clear, what we're doing here. We're exploring these behaviors from that perspective. I mean, one thing is for certain. Everyone is here because a sperm met an egg, either in a dish or in vivo, as we said before. And at least in 2021, there's no way around that fact.
Yeah.
And what preceded that is typically this act we call sex. And sometimes, hopefully, I like to think, orgasm is associated with that sexual activity. Masturbation as one dimension of that is something that I think it can and should be discussed if, in fact, there are data that relate it to sleep.
Yeah, and both of those routes seem to lead to a sleep benefit. Now, I'm not saying that it's all about the orgasm. I think, as we spoke about with oxytocin, there is some degree of pair bonding that if you have a partner and you experience, an intimate, loving, relationship that involves that, then you can have hormonal benefits that are sleep promoting that may not necessarily be seen if you're just engaging, in the solo singular act of masturbation. So what we certainly know now, and I am not someone to take any advice on when it comes to anything relationship-wise or sex-wise.
That's a different episode of the podcast.
Yeah, certainly. And that's not a podcast series that I'm going to be releasing anytime soon. It's going to be mostly about sleep, although I will touch on, I'll release a podcast on sleep and sex. But that's the data that we have so far. We also know that it works both ways, though, and it's commonly the same way with sleep. Sleep and exercise, sleep and diet. How you eat can affect how you sleep. How you sleep can affect how you eat. Same with exercise, and it turns out it's the same way with sexual behavior too. So here we're talking about whether sex can help with sleep. Can sleep help with your relationship and sex? And the answer is yes, it can. Firstly, we know, and we've spoken a little bit about this, that the reproductive hormones are under profound sleep regulation.
Both estrogen and testosterone.
Estrogen, testosterone.
Because we hear so often about testosterone
as well.
But women who, or I should say anyone who's interested in having higher levels of estrogen or normal, healthy levels of estrogen, I presume the data show for estrogen what the data also show similarly for testosterone, which is if you get too little or poor quality of sleep, both sex steroid hormones, as they're referred to, testosterone and estrogen, which are present in both males and females and every variation thereof, are going to be diminished below normal healthy levels, correct?
Estrogen, testosterone, FSH in women, a key hormone in the regulation key for conception, of course. All of these sex hormones seem to become significantly disrupted when sleep becomes of short quantity or poor quality. We also know that in women, sleep disruption can usually lead to menstrual cycle disruption. We know this particularly from evidence in shift working women, where they are nighttime shift workers. They struggle with sleep during the day. Often menstruation is disrupted or even becomes impaired. But we also know it works this way not just for sex hormones, but for sex itself. For example, we found that for every 1 hour of sleep, extra sleep that a woman gets, her interest in becoming sexually intimate with her partner increases by 14%, which is, a non-trivial amount. And then the final part of, I think, this equation when it comes to sleep and sex is your relationship itself. And there's some great work here from UC Berkeley by Professor Serena Chen. And what she found was that restless nights mean for far more brutal fights in your relationship. And they did this in a number of different elegant ways, and vice versa as well.